Welcome, everybody. Thank you for attending today's webinar on the 10 myths about college savings plans. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. The goal for today's presentation is roughly 45 minutes, 30 of which will be the actual presentation, followed by an optional 15 minutes of Q&A. As a friendly reminder, cameras and microphones will be turned off during the webinar, but please feel free to use the Q&A button for questions and comments directly below. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Chase Ferderer. I'm one of the two lead advisors here at Comprehensive Wealth Management, along with Brian Lockett. Comprehensive Wealth Management is a family-owned boutique wealth management firm. We're located here in the Pacific Northwest, but we do service clients across the U.S. And our goal is to deliver a high-touch, holistic, intentional investment planning where we help our clients reach their personal, financial, and life objectives. Real quickly, before we get started, I do want to introduce today's guest speaker, Geoff Williams. Thank you for hosting this with us, Geoff.
My
quick
pleasure.
Introduction for Geoff is he's been in the financial services industry for over 17 years. His passion for the capital markets started long ago, long before the days of CNBC, where he would sit with his grandpa and watch the nightly ticker tape. Geoff resides in the Phoenix metro area, where he's been for a little over 20 years now with his wife, their 6 children, and actually a grandson as well. Fun fact about Geoff is, although he's been out in the Phoenix area for more than 20 years, he's actually never been to the Grand Canyon. So probably not going to be visiting it anytime soon because it's on fire right now. But hopefully one day soon you'll get out there, Geoff.
Yeah, hopefully so.
Yeah. I'm going to turn it over to Geoff and he can take us away.
Great. Thanks, Chase. Appreciate you having me, and thanks everybody for joining us today. As Chase mentioned, I've been in the industry for 17 years. So I joined at a perfect time, 2008. I'm sure we all remember that. My career started as an options and equity trader at Charles Schwab, and I've simply progressed into 529. So you probably are questioning, well, how do you go from like trading on the equity desk to getting into 529? A bit of a transition there, but it is a passion of mine. As Chase mentioned, I have 6 kids and a grandchild, and I was looking for something a little more niche to talk about, and 529 is certainly that topic. Now, most people would consider 529 to be pretty simplistic, right? Like we put money in, the money grows tax deferred, and it comes out tax free for educational expenditures. But as we go through today, my goal is to help you understand that a 529 doesn't just have to be used for educational purposes. It can be used for estate planning. It can be used for, maybe some educational experiences that you might want to enjoy in retirement as the owner of a 529. Things like a golf academy, as an example, which we'll talk about here as we walk through today's presentation. I've been in this role at Hancock going on 9 years. I cover all the way from Louisville, Kentucky, out to Alaska and Hawaii. So I have a pretty big territory. And my passion is speaking to clients about different ways that 529 assets can be leveraged, and ultimately, maybe help folks understand, again, that it's not just, for traditional 4-year university. As we walk through today, we'll be going through our Education Planning Center. This is a website that we helped develop in, 2019, right before COVID, actually, to help families in 3 capacities. So this website's designed to help families find the best educational institution, gain acceptance to that institution of their choice, and then finally identify additional funding sources, i.e. scholarship and grant money. To that point, there's about $1.9 billion with a B dollars of unclaimed scholarship and grant money each and every year. And our goal today is to simply help you uncover some additional opportunities that you didn't even know about when it comes to scholarship opportunities. Before we jump into the Education Planning Center, I just wanted to start with a quick kind of history lesson on where 529 came from, how it kind of evolved, and then ultimately we'll jump into the Education Planning Center. We'll all start to dive into some of the myths that are out there around 529 education savings in general. And then as we start to get done to wrap up today, I'll share with you some of those, more unique ways to use 529 assets. If your kids get scholarships, as an example, that would be our goal, right? To help them maybe uncover some scholarship money. But in addition to that, maybe your kids just decide, I don't want to go to college, and you guys saved this money for us. What are some ways that we can potentially, leverage these assets? So, quick history lesson, and I hope I don't put anyone to sleep. I know it is lunchtime, so if you're enjoying your lunch, hopefully this portion will be very quickly. So late 1990s, early 2000s, Congress and IRS came together and decided that they needed a better way for families to save for educational expenditures. So prior to IRS tax code 529, which is where we get our name from, there wasn't really a great way for families to save. We had custodial accounts, which are still around. You might also know them as UGMA accounts. My parents have a different acronym for UGMA. They call it you give money away or you throw money away. I was the benefactor of those accounts. And let's just say that there was a lot of extracurricular spending that went on when I left for college that my parents were not too pleased about. I'm old enough to remember when 65-inch TVs weighed 400 pounds. I know that because I carried
They
one
were
up.
3 feet wide.
Yeah. And like 8 feet deep. Anyway, I digress. But the point is, when I turned 18, I was not very responsible with money. And the downside of a custodial account is that at the age of majority, 18, 21, 25, depending on your state, the benefactor of those accounts takes over control and they can do whatever they want with them. With a 529, the owner always maintains control of that asset. So keep that point in mind as we walk through today. And I'll just share like a very cheesy analogy for you. But if Johnny goes to jail instead of going to Yale, he can't use his 529 assets to pay his bail. So anyway, a simple little takeaway there, but I know it's super cheesy. And but to that point, the other benefits of the 529 is you probably caught on earlier. The money goes in after tax, it grows tax deferred, and it comes out tax free. So think of it as like a Roth IRA account for educational expenditures. In addition to that, the benefit of the 529 is that unlike other account types, there's no income limitation on who can contribute to the plan. And the IRS gives us a pretty big opportunity to put money away for educational expenditures. So they allow you to use an annual gift up to $19,000 for an individual. For a couple filing jointly, that's $38,000. But in addition to that, they allow you to do what's called a 5-year forward gift, which we'll talk about a little bit more here as we start talking about the cost of college. But just so you're kind of aware on the onset, current 5-year annual gifting limit for an individual would be $90,000, and for a couple filing jointly, yeah, sorry, am I doing the math right? 19. Sorry, I got a little confused there. 85,000 and 190,000 for a couple filing jointly. My apologies. But to that point, you can see that you could put a lot of money away, allow it to grow again, tax deferred, and come out tax free. And I'll show you just how impactful that could potentially be for some of these costs as we walk in through the Educational Planning Center. So without much further ado, I will share my screen here, and we'll start by walking through the Education Planning Center. Perfect. So to that point, as part of the follow-up from today's presentation, Chase and team will send you an email. Just as a heads up, that email is going to come from a third party. And that third party is called Invite Education. To be completely frank and transparent, the email does look a little spammy. It's going to say your financial advisor is inviting you to the Education Planning Center. It's not going to say Chase or Brian. It's just going to say your financial advisor. That is a legitimate email from Chase or Brian or whoever your team member is. And ultimately, that is how you can register for the Education Planning Center. There is no cost for you to use this. This is a free resource that Comprehensive Wealth Management offers their clients. So with that in mind, once you click on that link, it'll ask you to go through a registration process. That takes about 5 minutes. It's going to ask you an array of questions like how old are your kids? Are there any specific schools that they have interest in? But it'll also give you the opportunity to input your adjusted gross income and also input how many assets you have saved towards that financial goal of saving for college. And that'll help calculate financial aid, which I'll show you here in just a second. That is optional. You don't have to put that information in, but if you want to take full benefit of what the website has to offer, you can put that information in and it'll, again, calculate what you can expect to receive in financial aid. So once you've gone through that process, the first thing you're going to see is what we call the passport. And this is created to kind of help you stay on track throughout that specific school year. Today, we're going to be walking through the client experience for my son, Joe. Joe's in 8th grade. He just turned 13. So from that standpoint or that purview, as an 8th grader, there's not really a ton that we're doing when it comes to college planning, aside from making sure that we're on track financially. And then also looking at specific schools that he might have interest in. So if I jump over to the financial center, this is where we'll start to see that list of schools that Joe came up with of where he may want to attend school. A bit of a sidebar here, but we were watching the College World Series. A lot of these schools happen to be in the College World Series that year. And Joe immediately decides, I'm going to be a college baseball player. Let's pick those schools that were in the College World Series. So that is how this list was comprised. We'll just pick on Stanford. It happens to be at the top of the list here. So on paper, the MSRP price or sticker price, adjusted for inflation at a 6% rate, shows that for Joe to attend Stanford, it's going to be about $458,000 to that point. The reason that we use 6%, that's been the national average for college cost inflation over the last 40 years. It is the most highly inflated consumer discretionary product that is out there, even more than healthcare. So just be aware of that. And this is where that 5-year forward gift can really start to help families out, right? We're looking at a figure of roughly 450,000, and that's only 5 years away. Imagine if you have a newborn, what those numbers might look like. So to that point, $458,000, give or take. There is some good news, though. As I mentioned, if we input our adjusted gross income, as well as how many assets we have saved towards that goal, it'll give us a calculation of what we can expect to receive in financial aid. Now, most people think of financial aid, the first thing they think about is going to be student loans. In this scenario, there's no student loan debt included in that figure. So that number is comprised of scholarships, grants, and endowment money. And it's telling you, based upon your financial picture, this is how much folks in your bracket tend to receive in financial aid from each one of these schools. So for Joe to graduate debt-free from Stanford is roughly $360,000. So this is the number that we really need to be targeting when we're looking at how much to save for that educational goal. Obviously, Stanford is a big school and it's difficult to get into, but let's take a look and put some figures around that just to see how selective these schools happen to be. So if I jump into colleges here, on the right-hand side of the screen, what we're seeing is the overall acceptance rate for the total pool of applicants that apply to each one of these schools. And you can see they vary pretty drastically. So I don't know if not a lot of kids want to go to University of Wyoming or they're just not very selective, but they take 96% of their applicants. But as we scroll down here a little bit further, you'll start to see that these get a lot more selective. And I was actually pretty surprised when I saw this, that Stanford is more selective than even Harvard, 4.3% versus 4.6%. You can make the argument that that's a lot to do with marketing, like, oh, we're the most selective school in the nation type of deal. But either way, I was never smart enough, and I knew I was never smart enough to get into one of those schools. But if your kids have aspirations to go there, you can put in their GPA and standardized test scores, and it'll, give us a calculation of what our child's ability is to get accepted to these schools. And with that, I took the liberty of giving Joe a 3.5 GPA and a 1200 SAT score. And the website is telling us, based upon that academic makeup, we should not be applying to Stanford, Northwestern, Harvard. All these schools say reach, meaning that they're out of reach. Like, you're basically wasting your time and your money applying to those schools. And to put some perspective around that, UCLA is the most applied to school in the nation. They have roughly a 12% acceptance rate. But they make $12 million a year simply on application fees. So as Joe gets older and we input and update his GPA and standardized test scores, if that continues to say reach, we'll just cross that one off the list and move on, because I'm not going to contribute to that $12 million that they accept in, application fees. There's some good news though. If we scroll up here a little bit further, we're going to start to see schools that say match. So Baylor, LMU, UCSB, just as examples. These schools align with that 3.5 and 1200 SAT score. And ultimately, these are the schools that we should be applying to. So you're looking for schools that say match, and I'll show you one else, show you another one here in a second. But ultimately, if it says match, those are the schools that we should be applying to. So I previously mentioned to you, this list was comprised based solely on the fact that Joe wanted to play college baseball. The irony of that whole conversation is that he hasn't played baseball since T-ball, and he actually plays hockey. So maybe as he gets a little bit older, he decides that he wants to follow in my dad's footsteps. So my dad was a winemaker on the Central Coast of California, and Joe decides, I want to learn how to become a winemaker. So we come over here to the college search. We go to field of study and we type in viticulture and enology. And then it'll pull up 35 schools that have a degree program specific to winemaking. So not surprising, Davis, Cal Poly SLO, Washington State, and then Fresno State, where my dad actually graduated from. And you'll see that listed as a safety school. So I mentioned match previously. Those are the schools that we should be applying to. Safety school is the school's way of telling you that they're basically guaranteeing your acceptance based upon your academic makeup. I know that guarantees are not something that we typically talk about in our industry, but in this scenario, a safety school is basically what we used to call the fallback school. You would apply there and you knew that you had a very, very good likelihood of getting accepted. So that's useful information. That's extremely beneficial to us. We can set expectations with our student. And then we can come over here, look at what the net price is in today's dollars. Just as a heads up, this number is not adjusted for inflation. That is today's dollars. But we can also click show details and find more information specific to the school. This is all useful information. I'm probably going to look at this graduation rate, especially if I'm spending $34,000 a year in today's dollars. I want to make sure that my kids actually graduate. But I'm also going to look at this room and board number. And the reason is that, excuse me, we have options for how those dollars can be spent. So it can go to a dorm. It could go to an off-campus apartment or condo, so basically paying another landlord. It could go to a fraternity or sorority house, but it could also go to you as the owner of a property. So imagine you have kids that decide to go to school someplace where maybe you want to purchase a property. You can purchase a property, make them a tenant in that property while they're in school. And now instead of cutting a check, in this case to Fresno State for $11,000 a year, you're taking a distribution from your 529, having your child write you a check for their rent, and ultimately recouping some of that money towards the purchase price of that property. So in this case, assuming that Joe's on the 4-year plan and not a 5 or 6 year plan like I was, we can recoup $44,000 towards the purchase price of that property, and use our 529 assets to do that. Again, that money grew tax deferred and came out tax free. So we got all that compounding interest, and ultimately the money came out tax free to Joe. And then ultimately we'll just pay rental income property. If you decide to go that route, you definitely want to have a conversation with Chase and team about how to set that up. Maybe purchase the house in an LLC to protect you from other liabilities. It also makes it very clear for the IRS at that point in time that this is a rental income property. I digress. That's a conversation for you and Chase and your tax professional to have. But just be aware, again, that you can use 529 assets for that purpose. So again, in today's dollars, it's roughly $34,000 a year, but hopefully we can offset some of that with scholarships. Now, when we typically think of scholarships, the first thing that comes to mind for folks is going to be, well, what do my kids accomplish? What do they have interest in? And what kind of money is out there for those purposes? But there is money out there for things that parents do in their career. And I'm just going to use my dad as an example. Again, my dad was a winemaker in Central California. So I'm just going to type in wine. And had the internet been around when I was a kid, I would have been eligible for $8,000. Simply because my dad was growing grapes on the central coast of California. I could have taken advantage of this scholarship opportunity. I had no idea it even existed. But again, so I would start by typing in what your current career is as a parent and see what opportunities might be out there for your children, just again, based upon that. We could sit here and type keywords. Another question that I often get is, what age should we start looking for scholarship opportunities? And the sweet spot is obviously going to be junior, senior year of high school. But there is money out there for kids that are, freshmen in high school, as an example. So I'll just use 14 as an example. And this is where a lot of the, I guess, more unique opportunities present themselves. So as you scroll down here, you'll see the Zombie Apocalypse Scholarship. You have to be 14 years or older. You write a 250-word essay about how you'd survive a zombie apocalypse, and you can get $2,000 for doing so. This one's kind of funny, aside from the topic, but also the deadline is Halloween. So I imagine that there's a group of folks that sit around on Halloween for their Halloween party and read these essays and come up with the winner. In addition to that, let me see if I can find the Stuck on You scholarship. I'll just type it in here. I'm pretty sure that we're all familiar with duct tape, the silver tape that you can't get off things. Well, if you make your prom tuxedo or your prom dress out of duct tape, you can get $15,000 worth of scholarship money for doing so. Again, just, a unique opportunity that probably not a lot of people consider. And again, we could sit here and type keywords all day. If we don't want to sit here and type keywords, we can just simply come over to residency. I'm just going to use Washington as an example. And then it'll pull up scholarships specific to your state. So in the state of Washington, there's 70 unique scholarships that are available. We can just simply click through here. If anything, looks of interest, governor's scholarship to foster youth. We have interest in this, or your kids have interest in this. The deadline's January 30th. We could just simply click on this chevron, and then it gets added to our calendar. So once you click the chevron, it gets saved to the website, and then it gets added to your calendar. This is a great resource for staying on track throughout that specific school year, and to help you understand what things you have upcoming with specific deadlines. So again, the Zombie Apocalypse Scholarship shows up here, but also early action applications for a lot of schools are, at the beginning of November, which leads us to the point of, do we make an early decision application or do we wait? Just for those of you who are maybe not familiar with this, early decision is a legal contract with the school. If you get accepted, you are saying that you will attend that school. And to that point, with an early decision application, you are guaranteeing that you will attend that school if you are accepted. And I have heard of schools blocking students from applying to other schools as well. So it's something that you don't want to take lightly. Now, to that point, if that school is your dream school, and for certain, like, if I get accepted, I'm going to attend that school, then certainly take advantage of that early decision, because a lot of schools now are filling, upwards of 60 to 70% of their, I guess, quota for the year for students, based upon early decision. So it is something to consider, especially for those, I guess, more prestigious schools that are out there. I'm not a huge proponent of it because I like to have options. Like, hey, if I got accepted to Stanford and Duke as an example, like, I don't want to be tied to having to make, I don't want to be tied to one of those particular schools. I want to have options for where I can attend. So just something to be aware of when you're considering early decision, with your students. To that point, another thing to consider is that a lot of those more prestigious schools use what we call a CSS as opposed to just FAFSA. So FAFSA, as you're probably familiar with, is the application that pretty much every school is looking at when they consider financial aid. And one thing to consider with 529 assets is who should be the owner of those assets when it comes to financial aid decisions. So as a parent, if you own the 529, the school expects you to use 5.64% of that balance towards educational costs. So as an example, if you have $100,000 in a 529 account that a parent owns, the school expects you to use $5,640 of that every year towards tuition, room and board, books, whatever it happens to be. That being said, if you're trying to fully maximize the financial aid application, a non-parent owned 529, so typically this is going to be a grandparent owned or aunt or uncle owned 529, has zero impact to financial aid. So if you have a parent owned 529 and you're trying to maximize financial aid, you can change the ownership on that account to another family member. Just keep in mind that family member now has full decision making on that account. So just make sure it is someone that you trust to do with the assets what the intention of those assets is. I have heard stories of family members changing the ownership and then the other family member taking those assets and using it for their own educational purposes. So again, just something to be aware of, but that is I don't know if I want to use the term loophole, but is a workaround to fully maximize financial aid if that is something that you are considering. Speaking of financial aid, over on the resources tab, this is our paralysis by analysis page, and I promise you I will not bore you with all of this, but there is a free link right here to FAFSA. This will save you about 3 pages of ads on Google. If you type FAFSA in Google, you're going to get about 3 pages of ads of people trying to help you fill out the FAFSA. They have greatly reduced the number of questions on the FAFSA. It used to be like 90 to 100 questions. I believe now it's like 35. Pretty straightforward. So you can just, fill it out here. We also have free practice test for the SAT and ACT right here. By the way, with the new big, beautiful bill, if your students decide to take or have a tutor to help them study for the SAT and ACT, those are now qualified expenditures as of July 4th, 2025, up to $10,000 for school year 2025. Starting in 2026, that number increases to $20,000. So just be aware, tutoring and practice tests for the SAT and ACT are all now qualified expenditures as well. And then last but not least, we mentioned scholarships. Our website typically has about 8,000. If that is not enough for your family and you want some additional resources, there are 2 here. Those have been vetted. You don't have to worry about getting spammed. So you can utilize those as well. And then last but not least, over on settings, this is where I would input Joe's real GPA and standardized test scores as he gets older. We'll also go in and update his grade level to reset that passport that we saw on the front page of what we should be accomplishing throughout that specific school year. And this, if we update the GPA and standardized test score, we'll update that admissibility ranking of safety, match, or reach that we saw over on the colleges tab. So I think now's a good time. If we have any questions, we can pause here before I kind of talk about unique ways to use 529 assets, Chase.
I don't think we have any at this time.
All righty. So we'll keep going forward. So let's assume that you've done a great job of saving and maybe you have $300,000 saved for that Stanford education, as we kind of alluded to previously. And now your kids are deciding, you know what, like maybe college isn't my path. Maybe I want to go into a trade. By the way, you can use 529 assets for apprenticeships and so forth. But the likelihood is you're not going to use all of that 529 asset if your kid goes into a trade, unless they become a mechanic and you buy them all the tools that are necessary from Snap-on, then maybe you could spend $300,000.
Easily.
Yeah. But to that point, my 21-year-old is a heavy machinery operator. He's not going to use his 529 assets. He happens to be the parent of our grandchild, so we could change the beneficiary to our grandchild and give him a head start towards his education savings. But my dad has early on stage dementia. At some point in time, there's a very high likelihood that he will need a memory care facility. And when my dad meets the definition of disability, which would be 2 of the 6 ADLs. So for those of you who are not familiar with ADLs, that's activities of daily living. Meaning that he's unable to bathe or like take his medication, things of that nature. When he meets 2 of those requirements and has a letter from his doctor, as the owner of the 529, I can change the beneficiary from my son Colson to my dad to pay for his medical bills. So we would take distributions from the 529 without penalty. My dad would pay taxes on the growth portion of that distribution. But keep in mind, a memory care facility in the state of Arizona is about $9,000 a month. He's going to far exceed a 7.5% adjusted gross income threshold where we start deducting those medical bills. So the tax liability is going to be pretty minimal as well. What I'm getting at is this is a way to potentially use 529 assets to pre-plan or prepay, not prepay, but self-pay for long-term care expenditures later on down the road. Not a lot of people are aware of that provision. It's in IRS Tax Code 970. If you ever have trouble falling asleep at night, feel free to turn to page 47 of that and have a gander at how 529 assets can be used for disability. You'll go right to sleep. But again, a way to use this asset, not even tied to educational costs, right? Let's maybe talk about something a little more pleasant. Like, what are some ways that we can use this for fun things in retirement? So we mentioned Roth IRAs previously, and again, I draw a heavy correlation to 529 and Roth IRA accounts. The difference being is that with a Roth IRA account, there is an income limitation on who can contribute to those accounts, whereas with a 529 account, there is no income limitation. And by the way, as I mentioned previously, you can put a lot of money into them in one fell swoop. In fact, if you're opening a 529 account for yourself, there's no gifting limit. You could feasibly fund these with up to $550,000. To that point, maybe you're a high income earner and you're looking for ways to remove assets from your taxable estate. 529 assets are removed from your taxable estate if you are gifting it to somebody else. And again, you maintain control of that. So perhaps maybe you have some nieces and nephews and you want to open a 529 account using them as a conduit to remove those assets from your taxable estate, knowing that the likelihood is that you're never going to take a distribution in their name. And when you get to the point where you're going to retire, maybe you change the beneficiary back to yourself and use it for what we call educational experiences. So Chase and I were talking about landscaping and doing lawns prior to our call. I like having a well-manicured lawn only because I love the way that golf courses look. So to that point, my golf game is horrible. But maybe I want to improve my golf game when I retire. So I can go to Hilton Head, South Carolina. There happens to be a golf academy there. Improve my golf game, use 529 assets for that. I can also use it for necessary equipment, meaning that my golf clubs that need to be revitalized. I can go to PXG or Ping, which happen to be in my backyard, have custom clubs made, and use 529 assets for that because that's necessary equipment for a golf academy. And I can pay for my accommodation. So I can pay for my room and board. So we talked about $11,000 at Fresno State. In Hilton Head, South Carolina for a semester, we'll just call it $6,000 hypothetically. I could pay for my Airbnb. And by the way, there's no requirement that I actually pass these classes, right? Like I could just go and play the 8 best courses in Hilton Head, use my 529 assets to do it, get a new set of sticks, and enjoy my time at the Airbnb. Or maybe your retirement goal is much like my wife. So my wife is not one to shy away from a glass of wine. She loves her big, bold reds. And she decides she wants to go to Italy or France to learn more about winemaking process. So she could, go take a sommelier class or just go do some wine tasting through a school. As long as the school has a federal school code, that is your golden ticket. That means that any assets that you take out of the 529 for those educational costs are going to be qualified. So she could go to Italy or France. By the way, there's 722 international schools that have a federal school code, including like Aruba, Switzerland, Singapore, basically anywhere on the map. She uses her 529 assets for that. Goes over to Italy or France, travels around Europe, uses her 529 assets. Or perhaps your retirement goal is to simply sit on the beach in Hawaii and sip Mai Tais. That is also possible. Sign up for 2 classes at a Hawaiian community college. By the way, I think it's like $60 a credit hour at a Hawaiian community college. Again, no requirement that you actually pass the classes or even attend for that matter. And you sit on the beach, enjoy some Mai Tais, and enjoy retirement in Hawaii for a month or 2. So again, other ways to use these 529 assets aside from traditional 4-year university, and perhaps a way for higher net worth individuals or high income earners to fund a 529 and use this as part of their retirement bucket for things that they might enjoy doing in retirement without having to specifically fund a Roth IRA or do a backdoor Roth, which you guys are probably very familiar with. So with that, I'll take a pause, see if we have any questions, but I definitely appreciate everybody's time today. Feel free to ask questions related to what we discussed or anything else that comes to mind as relates to education, savings, scholarships, financial aid, so forth. Thank you.
Thank you, Geoff. It's a lot
Absolutely.
of great stuff. I really appreciate it. Sounds like maybe you won't be too disappointed if one of your other kids gets some scholarships or anything and there's some leftover money in the 529 plan.
Not at all. No.
Perfect. Well, it doesn't look like there's any last minute questions from the audience. So before we wrap up, I did just want to share real quickly, we do offer a sounding board service. That is a service with my counterpart, Brian, and or I, where we offer a 30-minute consultation to discuss any questions, comments, concerns that you guys have on the general market. Looks like we did have a question come in. 1 second. Can 529s be used for foreign institutions?
Yes. So as long as that school has a federal school code, you can leverage it for secondary education. K-12 private school tuition, not going to be qualified outside of the United States. And to that point, depending on what state you live in, that could also be an issue. So I'll just use California as an example. So on a national level, just for those of you who don't know, K-12 private school tuition up to $10,000 currently is a qualified expense. That'll go up to $20,000 next year. But you can use it for that purpose. So if you have kids that go to private school, you can, pay up to $10,000 of tuition. Currently, again, next year it'll go up to 20. But each state has the right to be more, I guess, restrictive on that. So as a California resident, as an example, that is a non-qualified distribution. California imposes penalty and taxes on those distributions. So I know if you're a Washington resident, obviously it doesn't have an impact because there's no state income tax there. But the point is, if you're thinking about utilizing it for K-12, and I know I got a little bit off topic here, but if you're utilizing it for K-12, just make sure that you check with your tax professional before you take that distribution. I'd hate to put you in a situation where you're, now being penalized and taxed. But going back to the root of your question, can it be used for international schools? Absolutely, as long as that school has a federal school code. And the easiest way to look that up is directly through the FAFSA website. In fact, Chase, if you'd like, I can send you the link directly that you can share with clients so that they can look those schools up if they choose to do so.
Perfect. That would be wonderful. And we'll definitely get that sent out to people as well. We did have another question come in as well, Geoff, and it says, For a child with a disability, can you use a 529 for programs for people with intellectual disabilities, or is it better to use something like an ABLE account?
Yeah. So if the beneficiary is under the age of 26, I encourage folks to utilize an ABLE account. And the reason I say that is because it then provides you a bigger scope of how those assets can be utilized, right? So as an example, transportation is a non-qualified distribution from a traditional 529 account. If you have a child with a disability, and you have an ABLE 529 account and you need to purchase a van, as an example, that would be a qualified expense from an ABLE 529 account as opposed to traditional 529 account. Now, there's nothing to say that you can't have both, right? And in fact, the big beautiful bill did expand some of the capabilities of both of those types of accounts. So I would encourage folks, if the child does have a disability and they are under the age of 26, to fund an ABLE account up to the amount that is not going to limit the benefits offered through the state. And each state obviously has a different threshold for that, right? That would be my recommendation. You kind of get the best of both worlds in that scenario. And then if your child ends up going to school, you can use the traditional 529 assets for that purpose. And for the disability needs portion, you can use an ABLE account. I hope that kind of helps clarify it for you.
Yeah, that was a great response, Jeff. I appreciate that. As a thank you for joining today's webinar, we're also going to be sending out a link to the College Plan and Resource page. You'll also have access to things like the recording of today's webinar, a budget template for students, and sample power of attorney forms for students as well. And I did want to bring up that we have some great events coming up next month. We have our fall market outlook, which is also going to have a brain health component with the Dr. Mark Milstein. And we also have the Art of Blending Strategies webinar, where Brian and I will be discussing the differences between each one of our investment models and what types of accounts you may want to list those in and who they would be best for. So again, a big thank you for everyone attending today, and a big thank you to our guest speaker, Geoff Williams. I hope this was informative and enjoyable on your lunch break. And for now, that concludes today's webinar. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate the time, Chase. Thanks for having me on.
Of course, Jeff. Bye-bye.
Take care.